Hi everyone, and welcome to Civilization 7 almost a review. I mean, I'm not really a reviewer, but I will talk about my overall opinion about Civilization 7. I will not score it, because I think scores are silly. And in fact, I'm going to start this video backwards and start from my overall conclusion. And I can actually show you what my overall conclusion is in the form of a meme. You ready? Here it is. It's fun, but, and what you think about the bad part will probably be key to your overall opinion about the game as a whole, which is why Civilization 7 is a very hard game to review or score, because a lot of it will come down to personal preferences and opinions, and one of the biggest changes in Civ 7 is the age system and the age transitions. Because what you think about the age transitions will be fundamental to your overall opinion about the game, especially gameplay-wise. Because the age system has major implications for the actual gameplay. And in case you don't know, Civilization 7 has 3 separate ages: Antiquity, Exploration, and Modern Age. Each one starts on turn 1. So in terms of how it actually plays, imagine Civilization 7 is actually a campaign that consists of 3 separate scenarios: Antiquity Age scenario, Exploration Age scenario, and Modern Age scenario. That's basically how it plays. And some things carry over between each age, but many of them do not. In fact, here's a list of what does and what doesn't carry over between ages. And this has major implications for gameplay in multiple different ways. It can also break the flow of the game pretty badly in some cases, which might or might not bother you. A lot of it will also depend on your preferred game style. So let me give you an example. If you are at war towards the end of the age, whether it's war declared by you or declared by the AI on you, once the age progress hits 100%, the war will end automatically. Because at the start of the next age, you will not be at war with anyone. If you were at war on the last turn of the previous age with anyone, that war will reset, and all of your troops are sent back to your cities. Some of your troops will not actually carry over to the next age. And your relations with various other players in the game, AI players, will have a bonus or a penalty that varies depending on what your relations were in the previous age. But said bonus or penalty is not going to be as big as your actual relation at the end of the previous age. So if they really hated you on the last turn of the previous age, they will still dislike you, but not nearly as much. Another thing about the age system is that the age progress in percentage will progress automatically on its own. You don't have to do anything for this percentage to keep rising. However, it will rise in bigger chunks when any player in the game completes the age progress, the legacy paths. If anyone in the game hits one of these milestones, everyone gets this amount of age progress. And furthermore, if you research future tech or future civic, you get plus 10 age progress. And they are meant to be repeatable. Not all of them are at the moment, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So, what that really means is that the age can end very, very abruptly. The most extreme case I have seen in my own games, in about 140 hours so far, is going from 85% age progress to 100% in one turn. So if you declare the war, and you're close to capturing, let's say, an enemy's capital, and then you hit 100% out of the blue, you cannot get like another turn after that, or 2 or 3. The age ends. So if you're not able to capture that city on the very last turn, you will not be able to. All your troops will get sent back home, the war will get reset, and if you want to continue the war at the start of the next age, you will have to declare an entirely new war and then send your army from your cities all over again. So you lose a lot of momentum if that happens, and vice versa. If you get caught with your pants down by the AI Maybe multiple AIs will declare war on you. This is a thing that can happen. And you're totally unprepared. You might even lose the game. However, if you're close to the end of the age, you don't have to care too much, as long as you can defend your cities long enough to not lose any by the end of the age. Because as soon as the age ends, same thing happens. All the armies, all the troops get sent back home to their own cities, and you are no longer at war. So this can be a significant problem for overall game flow. One thing you can do is change the age length. There are 3 different settings when you set up a game for age length, which is abbreviated, standard, and long. And since we're on the topic of age length, one of the things you cannot do in Civilization 7 is turn off score victory, which can definitely be a problem, not just in single player but also in multiplayer. Score victory will always be there no matter what, and the age can end rather abruptly. And when the age does end, the winning player is the player with the most amount of legacy points over here, regardless of what they did or didn't in modern age, which is the last one. Now, we can partially get around that problem by setting age length to long. However, setting age length to long sets it to long for every single age, not just for modern age. There is no way in the game to either turn off score victory or make age length much longer just in modern age and no other age. So this can also be a problem, especially combined with the fact the age can end so abruptly and disrupt the flow of the game. So this is the first question you need to be honest with yourself about. Will this bother you or not? Because the age system does also have significant positives. But this is definitely potentially a major downside, which might or might not really affect you, depending on your personal preferences. But if you hate the idea of the age ending, breaking the flow of the game like this is not something that's going to change. It's not really going to get modded out of the game, because this is how the game is built. It's fundamental to the entire game design. So this is one of the elements of Civilization 7 that is not going to get modded out of the game, which means it's here to stay. Now, on the other hand, one of the significant positives of this system, at least from my point of view, is that if you're playing a game and you have no intention of finishing it for whatever reason, you can just finish the age and get some sort of closure at the end of that age. Because every time the age actually ends, you get this score over here. So you can be the one who won that age. And you do get some experience for your profile and for that leader. We'll talk about that as well. So you still get something out of that time that you spent playing, even if you don't finish the game all the way to the end. This is a significant positive, the way I see it, and it's definitely more satisfying than just stopping the game midway through, because obviously, if you have no intention to finish the game, you can just stop playing it anytime you want. But then you don't get anything out of that game in that sense. However, finishing one age in Civilization 7 means you do actually get something out of that game, even though you didn't finish it. And since we're on the topic of finishing games, ages, and experience, this is another thing that's going to be huge for Civilization 7, which is the memento system. So mementos are special bonuses that you can get at the start of the game when you're setting it up. There are quite a lot of them. The vast majority of them have to be unlocked by leveling either your profile, but more often than not, specific leaders. And when you unlock a memento from a specific leader, you can use it on anyone. For example, this one over here, Bifocals, is unlocked by playing Benjamin Franklin, but I can use it when I play anyone at all. And this particular one is only unlocked at level 2, as you can see, but each leader has a memento that's also unlocked at level 9. And as you can see, I do not have a single leader at level 9 right now. The highest level leader I got is Ashoka at level 7, and this is after around 140-150 hours of playing the game. So if you want to unlock all of these, through normal gameplay, you're potentially looking at thousands of hours. And there might or might not be a mod after release that will unlock everything. I do not know whether this is going to be restricted functionality or not, because in some other games with similar systems, it was not possible to unlock these things by a mod. You could optimize your gameplay to farm experience faster, but it was functionality that was restricted and not moddable. So I don't know whether this is going to be the case in Civilization 7 or not. It also affects platforms that will not be able to use mods. So if you're playing Civilization 7 on a platform that cannot use such a mod, even if it's going to exist, you will have to grind all of this experience. And let me show you some examples of level 9 mementos. Here's one from Ashoka. During a celebration, you get +1 happiness per quarter per age. Here's another one from Benjamin Franklin. 10% science and happiness when in an alliance for you and the ally. Here's another one. +3 combat strength to your units below 50% health. Here's another one. Declaring a war against another civilization grants a celebration. This is actually a pretty damn strong one. A lot of them are very strong, but require a significant grind. +1 gold and food from specialists in tiles adjacent to mountains. Again, these are all level 9. Units in command radius heal +10 HP after defeating an enemy unit. Very good if you like to play aggressive domination games. +2 free war support on all wars declared against you. And on the topic of war, declaring a formal war decreases relationship with all untargeted civilizations by 25. Again, very good if you like aggressive domination games. And as you can obviously see, there are many other things that affect gameplay and your strategy that you unlock along the way. Many of them over here. Here you can unlock an expansionist attribute node, which is +50% gold towards converting a town to a city. This is very, very good, because you do not found cities in Civilization 7, you found the towns, and you do not have direct control over them. You have to pay gold to convert a town into a city, and this makes it cheaper. Significantly cheaper. Here's another really good example. +1 to the adjacencies of standard gold production and science buildings. This is really, really good. So I think you get the point by now. There are a lot of very strong bonuses that you have to unlock by playing the game. And while that idea on its own, it's not bad, it's how much you have to play the game to unlock them. Like I already mentioned, this right here is after around 140 hours playing the game. So if you want to unlock most of these, we are talking about thousands of hours. And obviously more leaders will be added to the game in the future. Some of them will be added a month after game's release. So my overall point is, if you really dislike this system, you might find it problematic. Obviously, you can ignore the existence of these bonuses, but many of them are really powerful. So it's kind of hard to just completely ignore the fact that they exist and you can unlock them. Still, like I said earlier, this is going to be very much a personal thing. And in this particular case, this system is not really as bad as the age transitions potentially, because it doesn't directly affect gameplay within one game. Because you can argue, you can just ignore its existence and it won't really change your game outside of the fact you won't be able to access some of these bonuses. But the age transition does affect your game, and it affects it significantly. And since I was already talking about setting up the game, here's advanced game setup. These are all of the options that you have available in advanced game setup. So there are quite a few missing that were available in previous Civilization games. You can't even do fairly simple things, like turning off score victory. The only way to kind of avoid score victory for longer is to set age length to long, as I already said. But this sets it to long for every single age. You can't just limit it somehow in modern age alone. You cannot do that. You also cannot turn off disasters, by the way. You can only set them to light, moderate, or catastrophic. You can turn off crisis events, so there's that. But that's basically all of the advanced options. Also, the list of maps is fairly limited. You have Continents Plus, Continents, Archipelago, Fractal, Shuffle, and terra incognita. And by the way, a lot of these map types don't look anything like you might expect. For example, the archipelago maps don't really look like an actual archipelago. But that's just a side note. Also, there are no map sizes above standard. There's just tiny, small, and standard. And that's it. You cannot play a bigger game than standard. You likely will be able to with mods, but we're not talking about mods here. As a side note as well, Firaxis has confirmed that there will be no modding tools available on release. They will come later, but they will not be available on release. There are also a number of smaller things that you might find really annoying long term, and one of them, which for me is kind of a big deal, is the lack of quick movement and quick combat. There's no such thing in the game as quick movement. Now, with that said, most of the time, you do not have to wait for a unit to finish its move before you go to do something else. However, there are some cases where you actually do. And also, those cases aside, a lot of the animations feel super choppy. And this actually leads me to my bigger point about UI as a whole. There are a lot of issues with the UI, and I know this can be a bit of a meme in some communities that like UI bad. And it's true, UI is bad in a lot of games. However, if we compare Civilization 7's UI baseline to Civilization 5 and 6, I would argue that it's actually worse. There are a lot of significant issues with the UI, and some of them have actually already been addressed. For example, the borders that you can see on the minimap were part of the 0-day patch. My 140 hours that I played were all without these. This was not here. This is new in the 0-day patch. And there was actually an interview with the developers where they were asked specifically about the UI, and their answer was that they have not prioritized the UI. So take that as you will. That does mean there are fixes and improvements that are coming, some of them most likely very, very soon, but they did in fact say that they did not prioritize the UI, which is the reason why there are a lot of pretty obvious problems with it. Here's one really obvious issue. If you are at war with someone, you can't actually tell that you are at war with them. In this case over here, there's no outline around these units, but I am in fact at war with Isabella and with Xerxes. But if you look at hostile city-states, like in this case, if you are at war with them, their units will have a red outline. Or rather, if they are hostile towards you. Basically the same thing. If they are not hostile towards you, they will not have a red outline. But if you are at war with an actual player, AI player, not a city-state, they will not have that outline. There's also no map search, which is a function that was added in Civilization 6, and I always say that it was the greatest addition to a Civilization game ever, but unfortunately that's not a thing in Civilization 7. You also cannot swap tiles between cities. So if a city that's also in a working range of another city claimed a tile, that tile will be permanently tied to that city. You cannot swap it for any reason ever. Another thing is, a lot of civilizations have unique quarters which consists of 2 buildings, because in Civilization 7 all of the buildings are placed directly on the map, and one tile can have 2 districts. And in order to build a unique quarter, you need to have 2 specific districts on the same exact tile. And when you progress to the next age, a lot of buildings become obsolete and can be built over. However, the only way to really know is to pick a building that you want to build, like let's say a dungeon, then hover over a tile that's dark green like this one, and it will tell you that this will build over the barracks, as you can see on the left. This will build over the villa, as you can see on the left. However, there is no way to know, other than memorizing it or looking up every single building separately, which ones of these buildings can be built over and which ones cannot. You have to actually remember yourself which buildings are ageless. You can open the building list. For example, in this city, if I open the building breakdown, I have all the buildings. But I cannot know, without remembering it, which of these buildings are obsolete and which ones are not. I can tell you right now that, for example, the monument can be built over. The granary cannot. Bazaar can be built over. The barracks can be built over. The saw pit cannot. As a side note, there are a few places in the game where there are significant performance problems. This is one such place. If you check out me scrolling this list, it gets extremely choppy. And this is a significant problem in some specific areas in the game where you get major performance issues regardless of what your hardware is. It is very strange. But as I was saying, you get no information about which of these buildings are ageless. On this list, on the tooltip, anywhere. So if you want to build your unique quarter, and you want to build it on a specific tile that already has buildings, you cannot know for sure which one of these tiles has two buildings that can both be built over. Because what can happen is that you will place a building, let's say over here, right? And you will replace the barracks. But then once you finish that building and you want to build the other half of your unique quarter, you will find out that you cannot in fact replace the saw pit. You cannot. Saw pit is an ageless building. It cannot be replaced. Furthermore, some buildings will be ageless or not, depending on how you played your game, because there are certain rewards that you can get on age transition that turn a specific building type into an ageless building, where normally it would not be ageless. So it can be an even bigger problem sometimes. And this is a problem because it's not possible to sell or destroy buildings in Civilization 7. So let's say I build part of my unique district, in this case, one of these, and I want to complete my unique quarter. Let's say I placed it on this tile over here, and then I realize I made a whoopsie. Well, that's too bad then. That means this city will never get that unique district in this game without you reloading an earlier save. Because you cannot just sell the saw pit and build it somewhere else. This is not a thing that you can do in Civilization 7. You're just stuck with a city that cannot get the unique quarter. And a lot of the unique quarters are really powerful and a major reason to pick that civilization. And by the way, the only place in the UI where you are told which buildings are ageless is right here. This is a list of buildings that you can currently build in this city. So any building that hasn't already been built in here, you can see like the fishing quay is ageless, the armorer is not, and so on. So this is the only place where you can see that, and obviously also the Civilopedia. If you look up the saw pit, I can see that this building is ageless. However, unlike in previous civilizations, I cannot, for example, go here into the building list and, for example, right-click on the monument to open it in Civilopedia. I cannot do that. You also cannot right-click really on anything here to open it in the Civilopedia, which you could do in the previous Civ games. You have to actually go into the Civilopedia and type it in manually and find it that way. And since we are on the topic of Civilopedia, this is also within the UI category in my book. When you pick your civilization, whether it's at the start of the game or during age transition, one of the major parts of each civilization are so-called traditions. When you first start playing the game initially, you might not even realize they are a thing. And the traditions are basically policies that are unique to that specific civilization. If I open my policies screen right here, you can see this icon in the top left corner. These are specifically traditions. So you get these for playing a specific civilization, and you keep them after the age transition. A lot of them can be very powerful, and they can be a major reason for picking a specific civilization. However, if you want to know what the traditions various civilizations have, you cannot find this information in the game, really. So, for example, let's say I wanted to know what the traditions Mexico has, because maybe I want to unlock Mexico, right? You cannot find this information. If I go into Civilopedia, you can only find the leaders in the Civilopedia. So, for example, I can look up Augustus, and I can see what he does. However, I cannot look up Rome, or Greece, or Mexico, or anything, because this information is not included in the Civilopedia. So that also means you cannot look up their traditions. You know the only way to find information about the traditions for a specific civilization in-game? Let's say I wanted to see what the traditions Mexico has. What I need to do is go into the main menu, Game Setup, pick a game that starts in Modern Age, then pick Mexico, and then start said game. So I launch that game, wait for the loading screen, and then I can look at their traditions. That is the only way to get this information inside the game. At least keep in mind, I am talking about the build for day one, the build I have been playing. This might change in the future, there will obviously be patches and updates. So yeah, here we can go into the civics tree, check Mexico civics, and then I can see what their traditions are. Here's the first one, corridos, +2 happiness in settlements for every tradition slotted into the government. Here's the second one, +1 science in cities for every tradition slotted into the government. Third one, +1 combat strength for land and naval units in friendly territory for every tradition slotted into the government. And +1 culture in towns for every tradition slotted into the government. So that's Mexico. But this is the only way to get this information inside the game. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of this information will be available on wikis and such after the game launches. But if you don't want to alt-tab and look up some information on the wiki and stuff like that, well, this is the only way to get this info inside the game, unless that changes. And it probably will change, either through some update or maybe a mod. But again, I'm talking about the current state of the game as I see it. And these traditions are a major part of your strategy. I can show you some examples of some really strong traditions. So here's an example of something you can get in Exploration Age as Majapahit. +1 culture and +1 production on marine terrain. That is every single marine terrain tile that you're working. This includes things like navigable rivers, by the way. Here's another very good example. As Hawaii, you can get +2 culture on marine terrain, and furthermore, you can get a permanent bonus that's not even a policy from the mastery, which is another +2 on marine terrain. So you can get a total of +4 on marine terrain as Hawaii. So obviously, if you want to play a culture-heavy game, this is very important information. And eventually people will be able to remember all this. But my point is that if you want to actually find this information inside the game, you cannot. This is the only way to find it as of right now. Actually start a new game as that civilization and then just open the civics tree and look at it there. That's it. That's the only way. Also, since we are on the topic, each civilization gets a 30% production bonus towards a wonder, and you unlock that wonder through their civics tree. So in this case, we have a wonder over here, Hail Okio, and we will have 30% production bonus towards this. And you can see this information when you're setting up the game. So for example over here, plus 30% production towards constructing the House of Wisdom. You cannot see this on the unlock screen inside the game. But furthermore, if you want to know what this wonder actually is, well, guess what? You cannot actually know this unless you go into the game and then find that wonder specifically somewhere on the tree. So in this case, I can look it up over here. And we can see House of Wisdom and what it does. But if you want to know what that wonder does while you're setting up your game, well, you cannot, because that information is not included there. And this doesn't need to be anything complicated. Something as simple as a tooltip would have been more than enough over here. And sure, you will be able to just, alt-tab, look it up on the wiki, or maybe you will just remember all of these eventually. But if you wanted to know this information inside the game while you're setting up the game, well, guess what? You cannot right now. There are also a lot of smaller issues with the UI, such as the inability to rename cities or army commanders. You cannot do that as of right now. And my overall point with the UI is that none of these things on their own are really a deal breaker, but there are a lot of problems with the UI, and they really add up. So when you play the game enough, what you think about this will depend largely on your tolerance level. You might not care too much, or you might get very annoyed about this. But there are a lot of smaller and bigger UI problems like this. Again, I'm sure a lot of these will get addressed in patches and updates. Some of them already were addressed in a Day Zero patch, and the developers did say in an interview they did not prioritize the UI, which means that the improvements are coming. But I'm talking about the current state of the game as I see it. And also remember that there are platforms other than the PC, and some of them might have very limited access to mods or no access to mods whatsoever. So the next big thing is overall game balance, and this is also going to be a big one. And Civilization is not exactly known to be the most balanced game ever, to say the least. But what your opinion is about Civilization 7 will fundamentally depend on where you stand on the fun versus balance scale. Because a lot of the time, you can have things that are not necessarily balanced but fun, and then things that are not necessarily fun but balanced. You can't always have both. In a lot of cases, you cannot really have both, especially in complex 4X games like this. And I think one of the best illustrations of that was Frontier Pass for Civilization 6. Frontier Pass was arguably very fun to play, but it wasn't necessarily balanced, and it made the game quite a bit easier. I do think it's roughly the same with Civilization 7. There are a lot of things about Civilization 7 that are not balanced at all. There are a lot of bonuses and the synergies that you can use to really break the game. And once you have enough playtime in the game, and you have solid understanding of the game systems, you know what everything is, I would definitely say that it's easier than the previous Civilization games. So this here is one game that I played. It's towards the end of Modern Age, and this was a game I played on Date, which is highest difficulty available, on online speed, which is the quickest speed available, and you can see my yields against all of the AI yields. And more importantly, here are the rankings. I have more than double the points of the highest ranked AI, 22 versus 10. Now, this was one of my better games that I played, if not the best game that I played, but it's not really hard to stay ahead of the AI if you know what you're doing. There are some cases where you get a new AI spawning in the new world in Exploration Age, because that always happens, and that AI can get very significant yields. I had that happen several times, but outside of that, even AIs that do get significant yields are not necessarily that good at translating those yields into actual legacy points over here. And since we're on the topic of AI, it's easier than ever to weaken the AI through wards. Now, this is something that might change in future patches and updates, because it has to do with some specific AI behaviors. AI is way more willing than before to give away cities as part of the peace deal. I had many different cases where AI was willing to give me a city, sometimes a pretty big one, as part of the peace deal, and I never even threatened that specific city directly. And they were still willing to give it away. So that might get fixed in the future. However, even if it does, wards against the AI are, I would say, way easier than they were before, even if you consider that the AI gets a +8 combat bonus on Date just for the difficulty, and +5 on Immortal. But city sieges are easier than they were before, because, for example, the city center attack is no longer a mechanic in Civilization 7. This is not a thing. You do not get a free ranged attack that will do significant damage from your city center. That does not exist. Furthermore, no individual tile is nearly as tanky as it was before in Civilization 5 and 6, Because the way fortifying a city works in Civilization 7 is that you can build walls around multiple urban districts, and then the attacker has to capture every single one of those districts separately in order to capture the entire city. So this is a very good thing for the overall gameplay flow. The siege flows significantly better thanks to this, but it does make offensive sieges quite a bit easier against the AI, just on average. It also makes siege units, especially early on, significantly better because they are way less squishy than they were before. Partially because the AI cannot just use the city center ranged attack to almost one-shot said siege units. Combined with the fact that no individual fortified tile will be nearly as tanky as it was previously. So overall, siege units are significantly more useful in sieges at every stage of the game. And while the AI will actively defend their cities, if you try to attack these cities, the sieges on average are certainly easier than they were before. And there are many different reasons for this. Part of the reason is gold. Gold is a much easier resource to get in Civilization 7. You will often have hundreds of gold per turn without even trying too hard. I had many different situations where I had enough income to be able to buy 3 or even 4 units every single turn in my cities to fuel a war, and I just overwhelmed the AI. Because when gold is such an important resource and you get a lot of it, a human player will be significantly better at prioritizing where to spend that gold than the AI is. So what I'm really saying here is that, at least in my opinion, it's easier to weaken the AI through wars than it was previously, or at the very least, it's definitely not any harder than it's been before. It's just as easy or easier to weaken the AIs through war. The only times when I had some issues defending myself was when almost everyone in the game declared war on me simultaneously, and this can happen. I had this happen, even if they really like you. This can sometimes happen, but at the same time, I didn't really have major problems defending myself because you can just buy units in your cities. Right now in this game, I have 4.4k gold and I'm making almost 600 per turn. And if I wanted to buy some units, you can see how much that would cost me. I can buy a tank for 740, assault gun 640, and so on. The other reason why offensive wars are easier is because of the army commander system. Army commanders are very, very powerful. You can get some incredibly strong bonuses on them when you build up enough experience, because you only get experience on army commanders in Civilization 7, not on regular units. But an experienced army commander is insanely powerful, and the human player will be much, much better at taking advantage of said commanders than the computer player is. You will also be significantly better at farming experience for your commanders. But even if the computer player gets an equally experienced commander, he will not be able to take advantage of said commander nearly as well as the human player can. Because, for example, one of the abilities you can get is an ability that allows you to restore an action point and 2 movement points on a selected unit in range of the army commander. This is something you can optimize much, much better as a human player than the AI will ever be able to. You can also have multiple commanders close to each other with different skills, which is where it can get even more complicated. So the human player has a significant advantage in war over the AI. Now, I know a lot of the things I said so far might sound pretty negative, so you might be thinking, wow, this guy really doesn't like Civ 7. Well, no, actually it's kind of the opposite. I did have a lot of fun playing Civ 7, so I will go back to the meme I posted at the start. It is a fun game without a doubt. I had fun despite all of these things that I just talked about, and there are more that I haven't really mentioned that are much more minor. And it definitely has some significant strengths that I enjoyed. So, one of the biggest strengths of Civilization 7 is the variety of strategies. I think the replayability of Civilization 7 is really, really good. And there's a huge variety of strategies that you can play. And this is a function of the fact that you can pair any leader with any civilization, combined with the traditions system, which are policies unique to that civilization that you get to keep in future ages, combined with the fact you get to play 3 different civilizations over the course of your game. So, for example, you might pick an Antiquity Age civilization specifically for their traditions that you will then keep in Exploration Age, and you will use those traditions to really superpower your strategy in the Exploration Age and then Modern Age. I have done this myself. I have played civilizations in Antiquity Age that I picked specifically for their traditions. And then I use those traditions to really fuel my strategy in the Exploration Age. And there are a lot of different things that you can do. There is an extensive attribute tree. You have 6 different attribute trees, and you also unlock further options on these trees through the profile experience system. This is something I talked about earlier, and you might like or not like this. It will come down to personal preferences. The fact you have to actually unlock options on these trees through experience that you have to grind will not be a positive for everyone. And again, there might be a mod that unlocks all of them, I do not know. But even without these unlocks, there are a lot of different options in these trees. Bottom line is, there's a huge number of potential bonuses and synergies you can stack on top of each other in a variety of different ways. So as far as the release date of Civilization 7 goes, I think it has more variety than ever before for a release day Civilization game. And the replayability is already really good. So personally, I think that's one of the biggest strengths of Civilization 7 right now, and it will most likely only improve as time goes on. And this is without taking mods into account. Civilization 7 has some insane modding potential due to the way it's designed. I would even risk saying that it has bigger modding potential than both Civilization 5 and Civilization 6. Now, we will need some actual modding tools to really take advantage of that potential, and they are allegedly coming, but the potential is there, and it's actually insane. But even modding aside, I think it's one of the most replayable and varied Civilization games we had on release. So that's definitely one of the biggest positives of Civ 7 in my opinion. And obviously the mementos come into play here too. A lot of them are very strong, and they can be a major part of your strategy. So if you add all of that on top of each other, so mementos, traditions, 3 different civilizations, 6 different attribute trees, and a lot of other things, like the number of viable strategies you can experiment with is just like really big. And you can argue, and I would agree, that replayability is one of the most important things about a 4X strategy game. And Civilization 7 nailed this, for the most part. I definitely have no real complaints there, as far as replayability goes. So that's a huge positive. Another thing that will be a big positive for many people is that Civilization 7 is definitely easier to get into if you are a newcomer, and especially if you are not a hardcore 4X strategy game player. A lot of the mechanics have been simplified in many ways. A lot of the mechanics have been removed, but there's still a lot of complexity and depth under the hood. So if you felt intimidated by Civilization 5 or 6 before, you might find it significantly easier to get into Civilization 7. But for the veterans and far more hardcore 4X players, there's still a lot of depth in Civilization 7. You could maybe even make an argument that there's even more complexity in Civilization 7 than in previous Civilization games, due to my previous point, which is the huge number of viable strategies that you do have in Civilization 7, because of how many things you can mix and match, and how many different bonuses you can take advantage of, and various synergies. And my next big point is actually the overall flow of the game. And I mentioned ages earlier as potentially a negative, and it's true that the ages can end very abruptly and break the flow of the game. It can disrupt your war, prevent you from achieving your objectives, there are also a lot of things that are pointless to do closer to the end of the age because they will not carry over to the next age. So it can be a negative on one hand, but on the other hand, it can be a positive. So using myself as an example, I found myself playing on online speed a lot, and the game actually plays surprisingly well on a quick speed and online speed. Furthermore, because of the ages system, on online speed specifically, you can finish one age in an hour or two, depending on how many wars you'll be fighting, and how much micro you'll be doing. So if you only have like 2 or 3 hours, and you want to play Civilization, but you also want to actually feel like you achieved something in that time, you can play a game on online or quick speed and knock out one age in 2 hours or less, very easily. And you will have achieved actually something. If you treat one age as a separate scenario and look at a full Civilization game as a campaign that's divided into 3 separate scenarios, and certain things carry over between those scenarios, you will certainly enjoy the game a lot more, I think. There's also the advanced start system, where you can start your game in exploration or modern age, and it actually works really, really well. I was a little bit skeptical about how well advanced start will work, but it actually works very well, better than I expected it to. On standard speed, an actual full game will take between 10 and 15 hours. So that's still fairly significant, but on online speed, you can finish one game in 4 or 5 hours or less. And it flows really well on online speed. I've been enjoying online speed more than I ever have before. In past Civilization games, I wasn't a big fan of quick and online speed, but in Civilization 7, it really, really works very well. And I also think this will be a major positive in multiplayer. With that said, I haven't actually had the chance to play multiplayer in Civilization 7 myself, so I can't comment too much on that. But I do think that due to the nature of the game and the way it's designed, multiplayer will be more interesting than in previous Civilization games. There are some potential issues I see in multiplayer. So for example, if you start in Antiquity Age, you cannot play with more than 5 players at the moment, and you will always have AI players start in Exploration Age, unless you finish that game at the end of Antiquity, which you can do. But if you progress that game to Exploration and beyond, you will always have some AI players inside the game, which can definitely be abused in a multiplayer setting. So that is a concern potentially. But outside of concerns like that, I do think Civ 7 will be a very fun game in multiplayer. So one more really important topic is the modern age. And I have to say, personally, I found the modern age, and especially victory conditions, to be less engaging than in previous Civilization games. Furthermore, there is no traditional domination victory in Civilization 7, as you can see over here. The way you win a military victory in Civilization 7 is, yes, by conquering enemy cities, but you just need to get 20 points, and you get 3 points for conquering a city of an opponent with a different ideology. Because ideologies are back in Civilization 7, and you do have democracy, fascism, and communism. And you get various benefits, but you do not get, for example, tenets, like you did in Civilization 5. You have 3 items that you can research in a separate civic tree that belongs to each government, and you can get these policies and bonuses, depending on which ideology you picked. And you will get significant bonuses and or penalties with the AIs based on which ideology they picked. So for example, here you can see that I have a 270 point bonus because I have a shared ideology. That is huge, considering I'm at plus 90 and helpful level. Here I got the opposite, minus 216 points, because I have an opposed ideology. And that means I end up with minus 90 and hostile. So these bonuses to shared or opposed ideologies will basically negate vast majority, if not all of the other bonuses or penalties. So you will get a big diplomatic shakeup during the modern age. So just to sum things up, what my overall opinion about the game is, I think that in general, it's a very fun game. It does have some issues, like the UI issues. There are actually a lot of them. I expect a lot of them to be addressed over time in updates and in mods. But as it stands right now, there are quite a few UI problems. But the game has a huge variety of strategies, probably greater than ever before on release in any mainline Civilization game. It's also easier to get into, especially for people who are not hardcore 4X gamers. The game also flows pretty well on the quick and online speed, which makes the game significantly shorter. If you only have 2 or 3 hours of time, you can knock out a full age on a quick or online speed no problem. And it's much more satisfying than just stopping at a completely arbitrary point. With all that said, your overall opinion about Civilization 7 will depend heavily on what you think about some of the key systems in Civilization 7, such as the age system and the age transitions, because there's no denying that the age transitions disrupt the flow of the game quite significantly. You cannot say that this system is objectively a net positive or objectively a net negative, because it will just heavily depend on personal preferences. And I know you can say this about many different things, but I think it's more true than ever with the age system specifically. So just to wrap this video up, if you asked me, well, okay, that's all good, but should I actually buy the game or not for full price on release? And you'll have to answer this question yourself. The asking price is pretty high, there's no denying that. But, I mean, everyone has a different budget for games. So spending over $70 or $130 for their Founders Edition might be a big deal for you, or it might not be a big deal for you. I will say, though, that if you are not a hardcore Civilization fan, and or if you don't feel an overwhelming urge to play it on release, I would personally recommend waiting at least a little bit, because the game is definitely unfinished in quite a few ways right now. It is a fun game, and I do think the replayability is really good. The game is enjoyable to play, but it is unfinished in many different ways. So there will undoubtedly be updates. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the developers themselves said this, that there are certain areas of the game they haven't focused on, and that they will be addressing those areas in updates. So personally, again, if you're not a hardcore Civilization fan and you don't feel an overwhelming urge to play right now, I would recommend waiting at least a little bit. And if you're already patient, you can just wait much longer for bigger discounts, maybe for an expansion. You know, there's a meme in the Civilization community that Civilization games are really, really good after 2 expansions. I do think that Civilization 7 will uphold this tradition. It's already a pretty solid game on release. It has issues, but it's a solid game fundamentally. I don't think it will be really good after 2 expansions. So, I mean, if you are patient, you can just wait for that. Regardless of what you do, I do hope that this video helped you make the decision. I tried to focus on important specifics, so I hope that helped. So leave a like if it did. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one. Bye-bye.